My name is Debbie Rosen, and I'm the founder and one of the two owners of the Study Pro, which is an executive function and study skill center. It's a popular term, but one that's really often misunderstood. And we work with students from fourth grade through college in all of the areas that you see below. We're actually very excited. We're expanding the work that we're doing beyond kind of classic executive function, and we're working on a course for AI, how AI can help improve executive functions. So we're excited to share that with everybody coming up. And these are the other services that we provide. We really work with students actively here in the Homework Center where I'm sitting to help them to have the structure needed to get started and stay focused and move through their work. There are no time limits here in the Homework Center, and we provide structured coach support. And I think that's a big relief for families and for students, of course, alike. Study skills courses and other content-based coaching, like writing and math coaching, in addition to executive function coaching. We also train professionals. So I think similar to Diane, we are very focused, Diane and ImpactParents, we're very focused on executive function and helping teachers to recognize executive function skills deficits versus behavioral challenges, which oftentimes are what the executive function deficits are behind the behavioral challenges, and what strategies they can use to make it easier in the classroom. And we also offer, as I mentioned, a course which will be starting not this weekend, but next weekend, the next round for 6th through 8th graders. And also for 4th graders and 5th graders, we have those held on Thursdays. So our study skills and strategy course is held on Sundays in the mornings for grades 6 through 8 and in the afternoons for grades 9 through 12. And we also, in the winter/spring, so in a couple of weeks, we're going to offer a free workshop, how to get unstuck and right, for middle school. And then we have high school one coming up. We'll provide the date next webinar and in upcoming emails. But what we know for sure about students with writing is that oftentimes they get very overwhelmed and it is hard for them to initiate. And so we spend a lot of time here with strategies for what do kids do when they don't know, or when they feel overwhelmed, they don't know how to organize what they're doing, they don't know how to start. And we've held these for the last several years, and they've been hugely successful. So we're really excited about them. As I mentioned, they're free. And so hopefully you can email us at info@thestudypro.com or use the QR code to sign up if you haven't gotten information. And and then finally, some upcoming webinars after this month. We have 2 more. We may have one in May as well. So we have the author of Study Like a Champ, Dr. Garung, who has extraordinary study strategies that he's going to share with us in March. And then we've been asked many times to present our Smart But Stuck, how EF impacts performance. And so Lindsay and I will be presenting in April. And finally, why we're so excited that we're here, we are super happy to have Diane. And I was talking to Diane about how excited that I am. Both she and I have a very similar background in that we raised children that maybe kind of challenged us beyond what were our parenting skills. And so we decided to take matters in our own hand and to work to provide for the community what we maybe wish that we both had. And of course, Diane will share a little bit more about herself, but both she and Elaine worked together, as Lindsay and I did, to start their organizations. Diane, obviously, as you can see, her has an extraordinarily rich background in coaching and speaking. They're just now running or finishing their Parenting ADHD conference, which has spectacular resources. So I really encourage you to go to their website and look at all of the speakers. Brendan was there, Debbie Reber, who just spoke here, Brendan Mahan, who we spoke to yesterday and is just signed to launch his book, which will be coming out in a little bit. So we're very excited. His book, On the Wall of Awful. And he spoke in September here. So with that, I am going to welcome you. We're so excited because you've been so much in the trenches yourself and you really get it. And we're excited to hear how can we as parents be more effective acting and having some of the skill sets as a coach that we so often wish we had that little specialist in the background helping us when we're in kind of our most challenging moments. So thank you, Diane, so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'll let you share your screen, and I'm going to send your email to your website link to
Actually, Deb,
everybody.
let's do this. We've got a special gift for the folks that are listening to this, and it's let me give you that link too. It's
Okay.
a little different. It's impactparents.com/studypro. And so if
Oh,
people are
nice.
interested in connecting with us, I'll say it again at the very end. We've got a QR code in here somewhere, I'm sure, just like you did. But if they go to impactparents.com/studypro, we've got a free guide that we created around communication tools. I'm going to be talking briefly about communication. We've only got about 45 minutes here, but I'm excited to share a little bit more in-depth information with your community if they're interested in connecting with us.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm going to put myself on mute, but I'll come out if there's any like burning questions that we want to ask.
Perfect. And I, because I can't do the chat, I would value some help kind of keeping an eye on that as well. That
Okay.
Perfect.
Of course. Yes.
So we're going to talk about what we call a coach approach to parenting. At Impact Parents, we work with parents of what we call complex kids. And complex kids generically are kids who struggle with life, learning, social, emotional, those sorts of things. And I always say that if you have a complex kid, you know it. And generically underneath all of it is, we'll talk a little bit more, but a lot of these are kids with executive function challenges. So they're very familiar to your community. And whether your kid has an official diagnosis or not a diagnosis, the tools we teach parenting to parents are just solid parenting, right? And that's the cool thing is that the backstory is that my business partner, Elaine Taylor Klaus, and I both became coaches kind of in midlife. We each in our separate families had 3 complex kids. And when we became coaches, we realized and recognized that we became much stronger parents and that it wasn't rocket science. So what we do is we teach coaching tools to parents, not so that you can become your kid's coach. Debbie's team is going to do that for you, but because we know that coaching is an empowerment-based modality. And what we really want as parents is to help our kids to become more independent, identify their own goals, identify their own strengths, their own challenges, and move forward. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a few tools that we teach at Impact Parents. You'll notice here that it says Impact ADHD and Impact Parents. When we started our company in 2010, our focus was parents of kids with ADHD. And we recognized 2 things. One is that kids with ADHD have all kinds of other things going on. And that the tools and the strategies we were teaching were applicable whether your kid has anxiety, just executive function challenges, if they're twice exceptional, if they've got autism, if they, I mean, as I said, these are going to be strong parenting tools. And so we changed our naming about 8 years ago to Impact Parents to really recognize and embrace what was going on in the community and supporting parents in a very different way. So I'm curious, I know there's a few of you here, talk a little bit about, or put in the chat, let me see if I can find my chat. What are some of the key challenges that you are facing as a parent right now, just to connect in with those of you who are with us live, and I'll share some things that I see as common parenting challenges, but I'm just curious. And Debbie, I don't know if you want to share some of the things you hear from parents all the time. Ups and downs with emotions. Thank you. Teenage apathy, extreme prickliness. I love that. Slow processing, working with my kids on meeting school deadlines, trying to get my son to help with homework with lots of pushback, no amount of help or plans to help my kid for college, bursts of anger, talking back. Awesome, super helpful and relatable, right? It's this sort of a part of what I hope you're seeing is that some of the other parents are struggling with the same sorts of things that you're struggling with. The kinds of things that the patterns that I think we see the most are the big emotions, whether it's your kid or the adults in the family. We'll talk about that in a minute. Distractions. This world is so full of distractions right now. It's hard to avoid them. School issues, logistics, organization, nagging, micromanaging. How many of you find yourself in that nagging and micromanaging space, which leads to conflict and power struggles and relationship disconnects? I mean, all these things kind of interplay with one another, don't they? Which leads to overwhelm and frustration, sometimes shame and self-doubt that's going on underneath it. A lot of times we don't even see the shame and the self-doubt in our kids. Sometimes it's us that's feeling the shame and the self-doubt because our kids aren't, I was with a small group of parents the other day, and we were talking about the fact that so much of our confidence as parents gets wrapped up in how well our kids are or are not performing. And so it can end up being in that sort of shame and self-doubt cycle for us and for them both, which sometimes leads to avoidance. And I think that whichever of these challenges are typical for your family, and most of us, it's sometimes this and it's sometimes that, what we really want to do is look at what's going on underneath the surface. The iceberg is a typical image here, but so much of what we see that's going on for our kids is really not visible, particularly if you've got a child with executive function challenges. I mean, they used to say, like back in the day, that ADHD was an invisible challenge, right? Because if you see a kid, unless you're engaging with them, interacting with them, if they've got executive function challenges, you're really not aware of what's going on. And what's going on underneath for complex kids, again, whether you have a diagnosis or not, some of these kids struggle with things like isolation and social issues. They struggle with avoidance. They struggle with low self-esteem. A lot of them are feeling out of control or hopeless. Right? It's just there's this avoidance. A lot of times what we see, if we see a kid in avoidance mode, it might be that they don't know how to fix this. They don't know how to do what they want to do. They've gotten to the point where they know they're struggling. They don't quite understand why they're struggling. A lot of times as adults, we tell them, you're so smart. What's your problem? We hopefully don't say what's your problem, but there's this incongruency that happens with these kids where their capabilities in some areas are so different than their capabilities in others. And I was like, one of the interviews, Debbie, you were talking about the conference we did last week, and we did a 3-day summit. We do it annually, where we talk to experts and really focus in on some of the key challenges that are present in our community. And one of the things we were talking about was gifted and struggling, right? It's twice exceptional is the terminology that this particular expert was using. But if you've got a kid who's very intellectual or does well in school but does poorly socially, or if you've got a kid who is very sensitive and emotional and mature in terms of their emotional quotient, but they're struggling with executive functions, a lot of times these kids, because they don't understand, I'm really good at this, but this is really hard for me. If they don't have an explanation for why that's going on, it leads to some of these things. The perfectionism, the unmanaged triggers, the feeling out of control, the excitability, the irritability. And so if we see a child with unwanted behaviors, I'm going to use that language, I don't love it, but it's just they're doing things that we don't wish they weren't. A lot of times this might be what's going on underneath it. And sometimes, I kind of alluded to this earlier, we parents struggle with this stuff too. And so we get anxious, we get frustrated. And part of my story, Debbie, you were talking about the fact that, I got into this because I have complex kids. And in my 20s, 30s, and even in my 40s, I was one of those type A, get it done moms, right? I was like at work doing the things. I was the one everybody relied on. I was the project manager, the product director. I mean, if somebody needed something done, they called Diane, right? And at the same time, when I started having kids, I recognized that their brains weren't quite working the way that I was. And so I became executive function mom. And I started doing everything for everybody in my house. It's like I'd take care of the lunches and the homework and the who's keeping track of what. And it really ultimately, and at the time, my ex-husband and my now partner are both adults with ADHD and anxiety as well. And so there's this complexity of living with lots of folks whose brains didn't work the same way as mine did. And oh, by the way, when my son was diagnosed, my mom called me up and said, "Oh yeah, I'm probably an adult with ADHD as well." So we kind of knew where it came from, but it was this frustration and resentment, honestly, because I was taking over for everybody, led me to be, a recovering fix-it mom, a recovering yelling mom. I'm really kind of still in those spaces. I'll describe it that. But I think the point is that when our kids are struggling, it often leads us to struggle because we don't want to see our kids struggling. We don't know what to do to fix it. And it really causes the same sorts of challenges for us as well. Part of you does just want to fix it. I want to acknowledge that a lot of us are in this place. It's like we get stressed out. It's like, let's just get the homework done. Let's just take care of this. Let's just do the things so we can get on with our lives. And the rest of us know, the rest of us, not meaning some of you believe this and some of you believe that, but I think most of us, there's this fix it part. And then there's this part of us that's like, I want to be on this journey of parenthood. I want to watch my kids grow and develop. I know that my kid has strengths and my kid has challenges. And what I really want to do is to help my kid in the long run figure out how to navigate strengths and challenges. And there ends up being this conflict inside of us because there is the overwhelm or the frustration or the fear or the avoidance or the whatever else is going on inside of us. And then there's this calm and confident piece of it. And so it's really, for most parents, it's about navigating that. Most of us really want to just enjoy family life. I mean, most of us didn't have kids so that we could spend all our time trying to get homework done and make sure that the rooms were clean and everything else. We really, wanted to have connection and fun and enjoyment and all those things that we really ultimately would love to have more time for as parents, I think. I'm curious whether some of you relate to this. I got to pull up my chat here. Okay, I'm going back to some of you are saying that the challenges are similar. Yes, definitely. Thank you. One of the biggest challenges that we rarely talk about is parent stress. And so part of what I want to kind of put a plug in for here is that stress and overwhelm is what really puts us into that fix it mode. If we don't know how to fix it, if we're feeling overwhelmed by what's going on with our kids, and statistically, if you've got a kid with executive function challenges, about 50% of you might also have executive function challenges yourself. A lot of parents come to me and they say, okay, well, how can I help my kid when I can barely manage my own ADHD or my own anxiety or whatever the challenges that you're facing? And so that throws us in a space of stress. It throws us in a place of overwhelm. And the reality is that when we're in that place of stress and overwhelm, we actually shift to a different part of our brain. And we do entire classes around stress and overwhelm. We talk about 3 layers of stress. You're either at aware or alert or at alarm. But when we start getting overwhelmed, forget when we're fully in overwhelm, our emotions and our logical brain start competing with each other. So our ability to be calm, our ability to be collaborative, our ability to be connected to our kids is really very different just because of the stress and the overwhelm. So what happens, we get into stress or overwhelm, we go into fix it mode, and what happens with our kids? Our kids start reacting, whether they react by avoiding, whether they act by being aggressive. I talk about kind of 4 main coping mechanisms. We're either going to be a controller, I'm going to make sure everything's okay. Avoider, I'm going to go stay in my room and try to pretend that this isn't existing. Distractor, I might be like trying to talk about everything else, or I'm trying to get my focus over here. I'm going to do everything else other than what I really need to do. Or pleaser, which might be, okay, wait, if you're all right, everything's all right, right? And so we go into these coping mechanisms in order to accommodate our own overwhelm and reaction. And then our kids are in their reactive modes, and it ends up being a hot mess. Whether it's your kid chasing you around the house because you're trying to get space because you're trying to calm down and they're like, but mom, I want to do this. I want to do this. Or whether you're the one your kid is on their computer and you're trying to get them to engage with you to figure out when is the homework done. I mean, all of this sort of interplay and reactivity is a big part of what causes the struggle in families. So what do you do instead? Ultimately, what we want to do is to enroll our kids in their own success. We want them to partner with us. We want to be there for them. We want them to be as independent as they can be. We know they might need help, so we want to get them to the place where they're accepting help, they're engaging with help, all these things. And that's really where the coach approach comes in. And I talked about this earlier, that when my business partner and I both had experiences of becoming coaches, and she's an adult with executive function challenges and learning differences both. And I don't identify as a neurospicy human. That's the language I like to use, but it's like, I'm not a neurospicy human except when I'm really stressed out. And back when I was going through menopause and trying to do single momming at the same time, it was a little bit challenging as well. But the coach approach is designed to foster resilience, inspire self-esteem, empower self-determination, guide our kids through obstacles, and really grow problem solvers. I mean, parenting is the process of problem solving over and over and over again. And what we really want is to develop solid problem solvers, because eventually these kids aren't going to be in our house. They aren't going to be going to study pro. We're trying to develop the skills so that they can do these sorts of things on their own. So I'm going to take us back to the iceberg for a minute, and we're looking at the things that are going on underneath it. And what often, I guess if I was to boil it down, there are often three things that are underlying the underlying. Part of what we do at Impact Parents, we talk about what's going on underneath that, and then what's going on underneath that. And you really want to get to the bottom of, okay, yeah, we're having a hard time getting to school on time, but well, where's the sticky spots in the mornings? What are the challenges of executive function? What are the, and it tends to boil down to these three things. Either the lagging executive function skills, and I know you're in this community, you understand enough about executive function. We'll talk a little bit more about executive function. It could be stress or overwhelm for the kids, and it also could be a breakdown in communication or trust. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these areas, and I'm going to give you a tool and some concepts from the coach approach to really help you to take some steps in maybe moving things forward in your family. As I mentioned, the coach approach comes from our parent training program, which is called Sanity School. The companion guide book is called The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids. You can get that on Amazon. It's a great book if you like to read. I just put a picture here of our model, but this is just, we're going to take a snapshot because we only have in a short bit of time from the parent training and coaching that we do at Impact Parents. So with that, first challenge, executive function. So if the underlying issue is executive function, and Debbie, I love the chart you had earlier of all the areas of executive function that you support, whether it's getting started with something that's expected, whether it's sticking with something, whether it's transitioning from one thing to another, whether it's completing what they started. I mean, these are just simple examples of executive function. And if the issue is executive function, we identify, okay, my kid's really having a hard time getting started. My kid's having a really hard time getting their feet on the floor. My kid's having a really hard time moving from getting off the bus to doing homework. I mean, any of these sorts of things. What we want to remember, and this is the coach approach concept, is that complex kids are typically 30% behind their peers in some areas of development in executive function. So this goes back to the incongruency I was talking about earlier, because these kids may be super smart. They may be reading at the 12th grade level, but their ability to organize their backpack is more like a third grader. And it feels odd, but if we can remember, okay, 30%, if you've got a 11-year-old, it might be 3 to 5 years. At school age, we usually use that language, 3 to 5 years behind their peers in some areas. Again, they may have maturity in some areas, but immaturity in others. But just remembering that, and I have kids that are in their 20s and 30s, and when they get to be that age, you still have to take off 30%. So that means that my 30-year-old might be acting more like at the level of a 20-year-old, right? In terms of their ability to self-manage and get their stuff organized and get the job or do the school or whatever it happens to be. And sometimes these kids catch up. Oftentimes, what happens, and we've learned so much more about adult challenges of executive functions, adults tend to accommodate. Adults tend to find jobs that uh, align with their strengths. They tend to hire administrative assistants if they have a challenge of being organized. They surround themselves with processes and people. And what we ultimately need to do is to help our kids get to the place where they know, oh, what do I need to be successful with an executive function challenge? Or they mature into it and they are able to develop the skills. And so there's research that shows that there are some areas where kids are able to develop the skills, and then other areas where they need to accommodate either now or in the future. The tool I want to teach you around executive function is to meet them where they are and raise the bar from here. This graphic is really very telling. You wouldn't ask a very short, what does he look like? Maybe a fourth grader to play basketball with the guys in the college team, right? And so a lot of times we say, well, they're in fifth grade, well, they're in seventh grade. But if their development is more like a third or a fourth grader, we want to go down to where the step there where they're at and go, okay, so what's a little bit more independent look like? And I love the stair step analogy, right? So if I can figure out this is what my kiddo can do independently, whether it's Saturday morning chores, whether it's getting out the door in the morning, whether it's finishing the homework that the study pro gives them, we can figure out how independent they are right now and then go, okay, what's a little bit more independent look like? Not, oh my gosh, I got to get them up to ninth grade because they're in ninth grade. Yes, maybe they'll be able to get there. And I want to challenge them and stretch them, but not exhaust them and not exhaust me. And this is what I see happening so much. We like stand up on the ninth grade step going, but you're supposed to be up here. When the reality is that they're down here at a lower level, and we want to stretch them up to get there. So Debbie does have like nod at me because I can't see everybody. Is this making sense from an executive function perspective?
No, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely want to meet them where they are, and otherwise we'll just be disappointed ourselves for sure. And we get a lot of yeses.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of yeses. Well, and I appreciate that. We'll just be disappointed, right? Which takes us back to the stress and overwhelm that we were talking about. It's like if we that whole sort of they're supposed to be in ninth grade mindset leads us to be exhausted, which again causes dysregulation and conflict and all that other sorts of stuff that is hard in the family.
Yeah, and meeting them where they are is really maybe trying to be investigative and sitting down next to them instead of looking down at them as this picture shows, right? Instead of, hey, let's try to figure out where the barriers are. Where are you feeling a barrier? Because obviously there's a barrier between where we want them to be and where they are. And so really trying to understand that, as you've explained it, is definitely the key.
Yeah. Well, and I love Melvina just says, in my experience, schools don't seem willing to meet them where they are. And this is a challenge, right? And that's where school accommodations, 504 plans, IEPs, all of those things can help. And our role as the parent becomes advocate and educator. It was just one of the things that's just been very telling to me in this last 15 years of this work. When my parents were at elementary age and they were first diagnosed, one with anxiety and ADHD and the other with ADHD, I thought the teachers knew everything, right? It's like this sort of, well, they've gone to school. They know how to support kids with ADHD and anxiety, of course. And I mean, the truth is that most educators don't get advanced education in diagnoses or in executive function. And I was doing a training for a group of teachers last fall. And I said, okay, so how many of you actually had a class or something? And a couple of them had like a class in special education, but they literally spent hours, only hours learning about ADHD and anxiety and executive function. And so number one, our teachers are not as aware. And number two, you guys know this, every kid with executive function challenges looks different. And so as parents, we become the super specialist in our kids, and we want our kids to become the super specialist in themselves. We want them to understand, this is what I have a hard time with. So I need somebody to help me, or I need a system, or I need a buddy, or I need the teacher to help accommodate. And until our kids get to the place where they can advocate to ourselves for themselves, which is a whole other skill area that our kids can develop. It becomes our job, which can feel like another thing on our list, or it can be like, okay, wait, this is what my job is to help the school and the adults working with my kiddo to understand what my kids' strengths are and what their challenges are. So just know you're not alone if you find that the schools don't quite know how to do this. And by the way, they probably have 10 complex kids in every classroom and who all have different needs. And that's hard as well. Okay, so let's switch to stress and overwhelm because we've talked about this a little bit before, whether the stress is yours or theirs. The coach approach concept I want to teach you is that you can do it all, but not at the same time. And, I work with parents all the time. And a lot of times when I see them, it's the very beginning of their journey. And it's like, they're having a hard time with this. And what about that? And they've got math and they've got chores and they've got sports and they've got, all this stuff. And oh, by the way, they're not on time for school and they're not doing their homework. I mean, all of these things. And the phrase we use is you can do it all, but not at the same time. And part of what leads to stress and overwhelm is that we see all this stuff that needs to get done. We're overwhelming our kids because there's 17 things that they're trying to do and 17 things that we're trying to focus on. And it's exhausting. But the tool I'm going to teach you is something we call taking aim. And taking aim is about focusing on one challenge at a time and getting very specific on the change you want to see. So the example I'm going to give here is mornings, because parents come to me all the time and they're like, we can't get to school on time. It's a hot mess. We're fighting. We're yelling. I can't even get them out of bed without dragging them out, or 17 reminders or 2 alarms. The alarm's not working. And so I say, okay, so when you think about mornings are really big. There's 21 steps from the pillow to the bus stop. And so we want to start by going, okay, so what's really going on here? Is it really that once I get their feet on the floor, they're fine and we can get out the door, but I can't get their feet on the floor? Is it that they're so distracted by all the stuff that's going on and the lists and they can't remember what needs to be done? And then they end up in the shower and it feels so good and they end up taking a 20-minute shower instead of a 10-minute shower. Or they can't even remember where their backpack is because it's early in the morning and their meds haven't kicked in. I mean, we want to look at what's one thing that's going on in mornings, because if you're focused on how do I get my kid to get their feet on the floor more independently, and I say that because a lot of parents have high school age kids who really are having a hard time. Sleep is such an issue in this community, getting their feet on the floor. But it might be, how do I work with my kid to kind of come up with different ideas of what might work? Even if it is me coming in and giving them a back rub and cuddling in bed or having the dog bark at them or whatever it is. But if I'm focused on, okay, let's just focus on feet on the floor for the next 3 weeks and try some experiments around feet on the floor. Or if you notice that the real challenge is they're getting distracted with screens in the morning. Okay, but they want to be able to do X, Y, and Z first thing in the morning so that they don't lose their streaks, or they want to keep connected with their friends. You might take aim on how do we get you out the door on time and get you access to connect with your friends socially first thing in the morning. But so you're narrowing in, and instead of just focusing on how do we get to school on time, you're focusing in on how do I help my kid know how long they've been in the shower and get out in a timely way so that we can get to school on time? Or how do I adjust my schedule so that I can be there to help them to get out the door? So your solutions and your approach will be different depending on what you're really focused in on. Does that make sense? I think that's the last thing on that. So Debbie, let me say, we're talking about stress and overwhelm and that the tool is taking aim. I'm curious whether people find this overwhelming. The question somebody's going to ask, and maybe you'll ask this, it's like, well, what do I do with all the other stuff? Right? It's like if I'm only focusing on one thing. The quote was, you can do it all, but not at the same time. And I remember really distinctly, again, when my kids were in middle school and high school, we sat down and wrote like all the things that we'd like to have changed. And we had this chart up on a wall, but then we just picked one thing, right? So my daughter, it's okay, I can tell on her, was working on being sassy, right? It's a sort of, so with her, we were working on being sassy. With my son, we were working on missing assignments, right? And so each of them had something that they were working on. And then you get to a level of confidence and you're like, okay, let's let that float for a while. Maybe we'll go over here and focus on something else. So Debbie, does that make sense to you and parents who are
Yeah,
listening to know your thoughts around taking aim?
I love it, because it's a relief to the system, right? Because we can't, it's our emotions telling us that everything has to be fixed at once, but it's not the reality. And so then we're again disappointed. So if we can identify what and we can share a goal, and you brought this excellent point at bringing this child in. Your son knew he was working on missing work. Your daughter knew she was working on sassiness. Then they're not waiting for all the other stuff to come at them by the overwhelmed, kind of not manageable expectations. And so I really love that. And I remember having a lot of PTSD about my son not being at school for so long. And then with my daughter, I just decided, I made the decision that no matter what happened, it was going to be okay. And even if we were late, it was going to be okay. And we could work on that one thing at a time. But what we didn't have to do is both be there at drop off, angry and stressed. That we could be at drop off, even if the feet weren't on the floor perfectly that morning, in a place that I wasn't going to leave her in a stressful state. And so I do think those things are really, really important points and great coaching points.
Well, I love that. And there's a mom in our community who recognized that part of the stress was the way the principal would like have to send her a note that her kid had been late yet again.
Yes, the shame.
The shame. And it was her shame. And so she went in and boldly had a conversation with the principal and said, look, for us, if we get to school on time within the 20-minute window of homeroom, and like you, we have shoes on and we aren't fighting and that's a win. And so what I'd like from you is like to give me a high five when we do get there and just be quiet if we don't for a while, because we're working on this. And I think that that's the piece of it, is that we can advocate for ourselves and for our family system to go, my oldest has a 6-year-old, and he was dealing with the fact that she's in a new school and they've got a brand new baby and all this stuff is going on, and she missed school the day that the baby was born. And they got the letter from the school and he's like, oh my gosh, I got the letter from the school. Was I supposed to get her? Like, did they understand we had a baby? There was no way we were going to get her to school the day that we had the baby. We had a babysitter, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, do you know what the school's rule is about how many days you can miss? He's like, you can miss a lot of days. And I'm like, well, it depends on the school, but most of us don't even have the conversation. We just get the email and then we go into, like you said, we go into the shame cycle. So being aware and conscious of what's going on for us and what's really going on in the system is an important piece of this. Cool. Great. Absolutely. So third thing, if the underlying issue is communication and maybe trust. And I don't know, I'm going to put a plug in for our podcast. It's called Parenting with Impact. And if trust is something that's important to you, if you say, I can't trust my kid, or if you feel like your kid has fallen out of trust with you, or honestly, a lot of times these kids don't trust themselves because of that incongruency we were talking about earlier. It's like, well, I don't understand why I have a hard time with executive function because I'm so smart. That sometimes breaks their trust with themselves. So there's a great episode on trust in our podcast, Parenting with Impact. I don't know if you want to put the name of the podcast in the chat, Debbie, that would be great. So if the underlying issue is communication and trust, what I want to take you back to is to noticing how your reaction influences the outcome, right? The reality is, in any relationship, we really can only control us. And we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. And so if we become more aware of how we're reacting, whether we're over functioning or yelling or avoiding or whatever else, but if we can pay attention to how is that my reaction playing into what's going on and the trust and in the communication, it's a great way to really approach this. And the tools I'm going to teach you are three communication tools. And as I said, the handout that I'm sharing with your community is a list of, I think, our top 12 communication tools, but these are three of the ones that are in there. The first one is ask, don't tell. And how often do our kids hit the door and we're like, okay, you got to do this, and then you got to do that, and you got to, then we're going to do that, and we're in this sort of, I call it director mode, because that's the language we use. And I'll talk to you about the four roles of the parent in a minute. But we're in this space where we're telling them what to do. And if you think about it, it's like if you're in a marriage or if you're in a relationship, and if the only time that person ever talked to you, they were telling you what to do, like, how would that feel? I mean, we're trying to raise independent young adults eventually, and we want to shift towards collaborating with them. What do you have for homework tonight? How is your day? Thank you. I appreciate that, Destiny. What can I do to support you? I have some ideas about that. Can I help you? If you're interested, I'm happy to share them. So that's the first tool. The second one is assume best intention. My initials are ABI. There's so many different phrases for this. Dr. Becky uses this. I can't remember what her something intent is her language. But if we go into relationship, whether it's with our kids or our co-parents, knowing that these kids are doing the best they can, they want to do well. Kids do well when they can, is the language that somebody uses. But it's a sort of, if we go in with that mindset and not say, well, they're just lazy, they don't care. But if we go, you know what, maybe they do care, but they don't know how to figure out how to make this work, it's going to change the way we engage and communicate with them. And the third is kind of something we've been talking about on and off through the morning, is we want to respond instead of reacting. Just being aware, what are our triggers? What are the things that throw me off? What are the things that throw me into overwhelm? What does it look like? This is a great thing to do with your kids. What does mom look like when she gets really upset? My family has this coined name of the Diane face, right? And my partners decided that the Diane face could have stopped Pearl Harbor. And I'm not quite sure what the Diane face looks like, but I'm really sure that my family knows when I get into that space where I'm just like, maybe that's the face. I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me, but our kids know what we look like when we're overwhelmed, when we're frustrated. And so having conversations with them about the fact that everybody gets overwhelmed and frustrated, and you don't want to parent from there. It's not healthy for a relationship to try to communicate from that space. So focusing on the responding versus reacting means I got to calm down. I got to make sure my kid is calmed down. And we're talking about real calm, not fake calm. So many of us get to fake calm where we're not yelling, but we're not really calm. We're secretly overwhelmed or frustrated. We want to be able to partner and respond and collaborate from a place of calm. So these are my three communication tools. Anything around those, Debbie, that kind of stand out for you, or anybody on the chat would love to hear?
Yeah, I really like them. Again, I like the point that you made that when your child comes home and you have homework, right? Or you say things that make them feel that you don't trust them. And I often catch myself and try very much to rephrase and really think about, okay, I'm going to assume the best of them, like you're saying, and I'm going to assume the best that they do know, and ask them, oh, were you thinking about after dance? Or did you feel like you had time before dance? Or what was your plan? That they have a plan, right?
Yeah.
Or, hey, assuming that they're going to study their flashcards, like, oh, it'd be fun to be able to sit down and study with you. Or did you know ChatGPT can help you make flashcards, or things that it's just already assuming that they're going to take action, or giving them those options of, do you want to sit here at the table with me, or, have a snack first, right? Before we sit at the table, sit down now. So it's assuming that they already have that plan in place versus like, don't you want to get started? Or it's, and I think those things are really key in terms of trust. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And I'm going to take that a step further to say that if our kids don't have a plan, or they don't do the things that they say that they're going to do, or they, instead of saying, oh, they're just lying, they don't care, to go, okay, something's going on that's making this hard for this kid.
Exactly.
And to take that extra step. Marianne says, assuming best attention is what's missing most of the time. Great awareness. Love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So for all three challenges, whether it's communication, overwhelm and stress, or executive function, I'm going to introduce just this quick concept, which I alluded to a minute ago, which is the four roles of the parent: director, collaborator, supporter, and champion. And most of us know what director looks like. Like, I'm in charge. I'm making sure everything happens. I was executive function mom. I know what it means to direct. I think you guys all can relate that too as well. Champion is something I don't think any of you have kids that are old enough to be there 100%, probably not even with their homework, or they wouldn't be working with Study Pro. It's that time where we're sitting back and our kid's in charge. Like, I've got a 23-year-old and she called me the other day and she's like, Mom, I'm working on my budget. She's getting married next year. She's like, I'm working on my budget for my wedding. Would you look at it with me? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's do it on Saturday. I mean, that's what champion looks like. And we dream of that day. My kid's in her 20s and she's there. We really want to focus on collaboration and support. It's the middle stuff. So what happens is that either we're in charge or we're waiting for them to be in charge. And until they're in charge, we're going to stay in charge. And the real opportunity is that space in the middle where you're working with them, you're supporting them to have their agency and their ownership. So here's what phase 2 and phase 3, collaborate and support, looks like. In collaborate, we're sharing the agenda, we're motivating ownership, and we're modeling organization. You gave a great example of this, Debbie. It's like, here are the times you're free to do your homework. Do you know what you need to get done? Do you want to do it before or after dinner? Let me know how you want to reward yourself. You know, it's it's that ask, don't tell. It's a great tool to use when you're collaborating with them. And I'm going to tell you, if you have young kids, start doing this now, because they're going to hit an age where it's like, I don't need your help, mom or dad. I don't want your help. I mean, and if they haven't already reached that age, which many of you probably have kids who've already reached that age. So phase 3 is support. You want to support their ownership. You want to encourage them to ask for help. Parents all the time come to me and they say, well, I'm looking for a coach for my kid. And I'll say, well, are they asking for help? No, but they need it, right? Until our kids are at a place where they're open and available to engage with help, we really need to focus on, how do I make it easier and safer to ask for help? It seems like you're on top of things. Can we talk about it for a minute? Is there help that you might need? Is there anything I can do to support you? And a lot of times the patterns are developed that this stuff is hard because they think we're going to jump back into director mode. The minute we open that door, it's like we're going to pounce. And we do, because we're in overwhelm and we're in fix it mode and all those sorts of things. So a lot of times support is something that you work on outside of the tough stuff. So this might be planning dinner together. It might be, if you've got a family vacation, figuring out where you're going to go and stay and getting your kid to help you. So you're creating that collaborative environment outside of the tough stuff. If the habits are in there where it's like, no, you have to stay out of homework, or you have to stay out of my room, or whatever it is. So collaborate, support are the two tools. And it's just even remembering it's about partnering and working together with my kids. So the exercise I want to do here just quickly is to say, let's pick one current, I'm going to use the word power struggle, but whether it's a conflict or not, whether it's one sticky spot in your family, and look at, what phase are you in? Are you directing? Are you avoiding? Avoider is a secret one, which is like this sort of, I'm going to stay out of it, but I know that they really need help. What phase does your kid want you to be in? And what phase is your kid ready for you to be in? And those are important to distinguish between the fact that your kid wants you out of it, but they're really not ready for you to be out of it. That's where you're taking aim, is not getting it done. It's, how do I create an environment where my kid feels safe asking for and accepting help? So if you have a minute, go ahead and do this exercise. Choose one power struggle and look at, where phase are you in most of the time? And what is your kid ready for? Or where do they want you to be? Debbie, you have an example with your kiddos?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, my older one is out, so I'm kind of in a little bit of a better place than I have been in terms of, I think the phase that he's in is wanting me to be in that support phase. It was at the champion phase. And so that's really what I've been working so much on, because I'm so used to being in the directing phase. And so I've really struggled to kind of not struggle, but it's really been a focus to try to make that transition. Um,
Mhm.
because it is hard to let go, because when we have kids that are complex, we are their executive function for so much longer than we want to be even.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like this almost kind of light PTSD, this habit that we have of, always feeling like we have to jump in and remind them of things. And so, but then that just really makes them feel not worthy. And so I think that's the biggest challenge that I've been having. Um, but we do have, Melvina was saying, I slip between directing and collaborating. He wants me in support. He's generally okay asking me for help, but won't go to others. Well, it's
That's
great
a
that he
great
feels so
awareness.
safe with you.
Yeah, that's a great awareness. And he does feel safe with you. That makes perfect sense. When you were talking, Debbie, what was coming up is a reminder that these phases are not age specific. They're kid specific and they may change, right? So I know that when like my daughter went off to college, all of a sudden she's on her own, and the things that it had been become more easy for her to manage herself with her anxiety in particular became harder. And so we had to shift back from, in high school, I was in more a champion phase with her managing her anxiety. She had her tools that she had worked on with her therapist, all this stuff. But then all of a sudden, college is this whole different thing. And so it's like, okay, let's go back to support. Are there tools that you want to try? Is there something I can do to help you? It's this sort of, and we dream of that day where they're completely independent. And the reality is your kid might need help with budgeting their wedding when they're in their 20s, or they might need help with doing one type of homework, but not another kind of homework. And so part of this is experimenting and partnering with your kid to say, where is it that you really do need, where can you be independent? Maybe there are two or
Mhm.
three classes where it's like, you don't even need to ask them anything about this class. You check in, a couple times a week about English because it is more complicated and more difficult for them to follow through with writing assignments or whatever it is that your kid happens to struggle with.
When I think
Okay.
for
So,
Melvina, oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say, I think for
no, 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 go
Melvina,
ahead.
it's just, I love how all of us, what this brings to all of us is this, as you were saying, kind of an awareness of like, this is what he really wants and needs. And so, how can I, to your point earlier, find other areas outside of school or outside of those areas that are contentious to be more supportive? And I think that's just noticing is a superpower, noticing that so often we don't really want to be in director mode, right? But we do want to be in collaborator and supporter and champion.
Yep.
And how can we notice when we're doing that? I think that alone is a superpower.
No, I love that. And the reminder is that a lot of us go into director mode, and we're going to call it fix it mode. Our kids see it as dictator mode, I think, sometimes when we get overwhelmed and stressed, right? So it goes back to the beginning. It's like we're in fix it mode. Fix it mode actually sounds different than director. If you think about how you were when your kid was in, kindergarten, first grade, you're like, okay, honey, let's go. We're going to do this. And we're going to, it's leader. You were being a leader. And then now, because it feels like it shouldn't be your job anymore, there ends up being this kind of jab with it where it's like, why do I always have to remind you of, like, like all of that stuff kind of comes and plays into it. So that's a great awareness. All right. So I'm a coach, which means that I don't want you to just stop with information. I think we do these webinars all the time, and I don't know how many webinars you guys do. What, a couple of webinars a quarter, right?
Once a month. Yep.
Once a month, right? And so I'm going to take it a step further today and say, let's figure out how to take what you've learned today and put it into action, right? It's a sort of, you've been absorbing from me for the last hour. And Debbie, thank you for playing with me. I appreciate having another voice in the circle, because webinar is hard. But everyone who's here listening, whether you're with us live, if you're with us live, I'd love you to type it in the chat so we can reflect on it. But if you're listening to the recording here, take a minute before you turn off the computer and go, what's my insight today? What's my aha? What's one thing that you want to remember? And maybe even what do you want to do differently? Is there one of those tools or concepts that you want to bring into your world? So go ahead, those of you who are here, please, everybody. I would love to hear from everyone if you can. A lot of people are people on their phone. I think most people are on their computer. Take a minute to notice when I'm stressed and go into fix it mode. Great. Love that. One thing at a time, Melissa says. Maybe it's Elisa. I'm sorry. I don't mean to say your name wrong. And while you're typing, I'm going to just put up the QR code for the communication guide. And the reminder is that this comes from our parent training program, Sanity School. We offer Sanity School as an on-demand virtual parent training program. We offer it with small group coaching as well as private coaching. The book is called The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids, and the Study Pro guide is at impactparents.com/studypro. Take aim. Try to notice how my reaction influences the outcomes. Melvin, I love that. Thank you.
It said, assuming best intention is one area to focus on, try and start in collaboration mode versus starting in fix it mode. Don't think of it as much director mode, but I didn't think I was as much in director mode, but I want to help, but I end up hurting them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. I think that that's the piece of it is there's two parts of communication, what we're intending to say and how they hear it. And particularly if we've gotten into some clumsy habits with our kids, even an offer of help ends up making them think that we are going to just jump in and take over again. And so it takes time to kind of unravel. I mean, think about how old your kid is. You've had this many years to create the patterns that you're in. It may take a while to unravel those patterns and create new ones. Meet them where they are. Thank you. Awesome. All right.
Well, I think it's perfect timing. Thank you so much. I took a bunch of notes. I really appreciate everything that you shared. I think for all of these, for all of us, it's such a great reminder to stop and sit back and to reflect, because we want, of course, what's best for our children. And oftentimes we're not realizing that the reason, for example, that we're so worried about them being late is our own shame, or the real reason that we're so worried that they won't do well on a test is because that means that they're not a good student and they won't have a great college experience and they won't get into, do well in life. And
Right.
that just stopping and catching and noticing our own anxiety, because the only person we can control really is ourselves. And you've given us just so many fantastic coaching tools, and just even the way to reframe how we think about ourselves as a coach. And even just to stop and pause before we ask our child a question, to your point of asking questions. And so I think that's been so incredibly helpful and useful, especially here who we're in this area where we're recovering from a rainy day and 2 days of our kids at home, maybe some fighting going on, and we're probably all very happy to be having them back at school. So I really appreciate this, Diane. You're obviously a wealth of knowledge, and I do encourage everybody to go to the podcast. We'll put all of the resources that you shared in the notes on our YouTube channel, and also in with the replay as we send that out. And hopefully we will, including the link to your parenting ADHD resources, because I saw that all of the webinars themselves, all of those recordings were available if people want to see them.
Awesome.
So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to you, Diane. I really appreciate it. Best of luck to the new you're a grandmother, I guess, your new baby too.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. No, and thank you so much for including me and Impact Parents in your webinar
Yes,
series,
hope we'll do it again.
and to partner with you, Debbie. Yes,
thank you. Okay, so long everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.